Thank you so much for being here this evening, and thank you, Mr. Mehra and the family, for the invitation. It's wonderful to be back in India. I'm lucky enough to visit many times, and each time it's even more wondrous. So I'd like to show you a little bit about my process, and this image might look a little bit confusing, but in a way it's like my self-portrait. I studied at the Royal College of Art, and in the essence of what we were taught, it was about creative freedom and being open to ideas coming from any direction. And there's a sort of a chaos within that process, and this is how I work. I sit, I listen to music, I'm surrounded by, I might sit outside or be in my studio, and I draw and I think, and I bring my life experience, the materials I've worked with, and I think about things I can bring to life. And I'm lucky to kind of contrast this sort of freedom with my business partner, who's sat here in the front row, Joanna Pinho, who does the business. So she does the structure, and I'm that. So I'm this kind of person, and I'll say, Joanna, look, I've got this idea, and she'll say, how much is it going to cost? And we play the game, and we go through the process. But we have a passion to bring ideas to life, and this leads to a certain clarity. So this is just a small cross-section of the work that we do. Small-scale architecture, limited edition, public art, a lot of experiments with materials, and a lot of light projects. And I want to start by showing you a project that I did, one of my last projects at the Royal College of Art, and we were given a design brief to grow a product, and that was it, very open. And being a young student, I didn't have the kind of precious materials like brass and silver and all these kinds of things to experiment with. I went to the canteen, I took a polystyrene cup, the ones we have our lovely English tea from. I went to my flat, I put it in the oven, as you do, and this happened. And I was transfixed, because what I was seeing were shapes that I could never draw. I couldn't even have imagined them happening. But what's interesting is, as they were shrinking, they were getting strong. And so as someone creative, as a designer, I sort of had this new material.
Paul experimented with this new material at home until he came up with the technique in 2002 that would successfully create his first commercial product.
Everybody who buys a styrene gets a light that's absolutely unique, and each styrene light will behave slightly differently in different circumstances. So it is a really, really magical piece of work that comes from this sort of very ugly, and let's face it, often horrible to drink out of, polystyrene cup. He's turned something very humdrum and mundane into something that's exceptionally beautiful.
So it was a fascinating process of experimenting with this material, like a serendipitous moment of transformation. But it also gave me this opportunity to kind of cook, create lamps, work with architects, interior designers, and illuminate. And it was a really, this was my car when I was 21. We used to go to factories, fill it up with cups, and it was just a really interesting first project. That kind of idea of experimentation led me to look at nature and think about electricity. And I set up these experiments where I was passing electricity through leaves and realized that they can conduct electricity. So I created this lamp. It's called Life 01. You take a fresh flower, place it in the vase, illuminates, and when it sadly dries up and wilts, it turns off light. So it was a little experiment, but it had a bit of poetry and a story, and it was captured by the lighting manufacturer Floss, who commercialized it. And KISS was a way of us taking this experimentation and upscaling to create one of our first public works in Milan, in Italy. And I showed this experiment to the city council and said, look, the human body can be the conductor of electricity, and we can connect it to light. And this group of people look at me like, where's this young designer going? And where I went was, I said, look, if you give me this incredible dome, which is near the Duomo, I'll cover it in light, and couples will go on stage and they will kiss. And when there's human contact, I'll turn on the entire dome. And they looked at me, it's like, is this guy serious? You know, is it safe? Are we going to get electric shocks? I proved to them it would work. And it was a really interesting moment, because I could see how a simple technology, a simple idea, can create this moment of connection. So there's stuff going on, but the simplicity, there's nothing needed to explain. It was about allowing the public to transform the architecture through light. We had this counter, and I went to UBI Bank, and I said, look, if I can get people to kiss, would you donate €1 for each kiss? And they were like, we won't get that many kisses. But little did they know that in a few days, 100,000 went to the clock. And so they were like, please stop people kissing. I said, look, we've started now. And in Milan, as many people know, once you start, people are very, very happy to show public affection. So it's a really kind of joyful project that shows this, it started with the flower, an experiment in my bedroom, actually, which led to seeing this public work. This work's called Bourrasque. We developed this double-sided light technology to create this sense of movement. So this is in Lyon, in the courtyard of the mayor's office. And there is a complexity again. We had to have this grid which suspended, electrified, but the public weren't interested in that, and so they shouldn't be, because it's nothing to do with that. It's about creating this feeling of suspended motion, capturing this sense of a natural force. And again, seeing these pictures of people look up, seeing something familiar but configured in a new way was really uplifting for me and the studio. And so we enjoyed this idea of taking these ideas into the public realm. Some ideas get spotted by brands like Dior, and they contacted the studio and they said, these leaves remind us of Christian Dior's sketches. And I said, I totally agree. And so we did this permanent piece, which is in Paris. Anyone who goes there, you can see the work. And it was really good to work in this space because we refined it even further. I haven't shown this work for years, but I know that the family have worked with Swarovski, and this was one of my early collaborations with a brand.
I took 5 Swarovski crystals and drew the shape of them in mid-air using light. People thought it was a glowing string or hot piece of metal, but in fact, it's intangible. And even now, when I go and break that beam, I get this sensation that I'm touching something physical. Inside a laser itself, there is a small crystal that helps amplify the light. And the color green was chosen because the eye is most sensitive to that color. There's miniature Swarovski mirrors held in a glass frame at perfect angles. When the laser's on, it bounces and it draws. The last line comes down, hits the top of the crystal.
So a very hypnotic piece. And again, there's this sort of idea of science within here, and there's a certain logic for me, simplicity, stripping things away, and you're just left with the cut crystal and reflection. And this piece is called the Gravity Chandelier. We saw on one of our visits this beautiful crystal chandelier. And as we know, they're usually rigid, heavy, static. And with this piece, I wanted to sort of reverse the mechanics. And so each one of these lines is flexible.
Gravity makes the shape of these lines, which allows us to place light where I want it. Me and my team, we cycled here at midnight with bags of flexible wire, crystals and light, and we spent hours composing and reacting to the room. It's about taking the fluidity of my sketch and transforming it to 3 dimensions. Traditional chandeliers, they're rigid, they're heavy. With gravity, you can see the mechanics are different. There's a softness, there's a flexibility, and when you touch it, that's when you realize sketch is a very important place for me, full of curated, thoughtful spaces, a combination of food, art, music, and it has an unforgettable atmosphere.
And it's lovely to think that everyone who has one of these in their home can compose light and create their own unique composition, but it's a production piece with a brand called Moy. And shade is it's quite an emotional one for me, because we first tried to commercialize this with the lighting manufacturer Floss, who attempted. Sadly, it didn't kind of communicate in the usual ways of branding through catalogs. But we've recently revisited it through our Instagram, and now it's back in production. And it's a very simple idea. It's about, we all know you suspend lights from the ceiling. We all know you have lights that are floor standing. And I wanted to create a lamp that was sort of in the middle of those 2 categories.
And there's no light inside. You hang the lamp with the thinnest of wires from a single hook. You plug in a focused LED, and this textured paper creates this image that's quite surreal. It's floating, it's flat pack, it's easy to install. How to place light in a room without the fuss of getting electricity from the ceiling. I was trying to create a lamp that sits in between a suspended light and a floor light, and it's so fascinating to see people see it for the first time. They were looking for the usually quite intrusive power cable. It's not there. Everything is handmade in my studio in London. It has an illusion of flotation.
It's a very simple lamp, and through the Instagram, it's gone back into production as a studio piece. Orbits, again, was about taking the usually rigid mechanics of light, whether that's in downlighters or car headlights, and softening. And so I wanted to juxtapose that with nature, in this case, rocks.
The weight of the rock creates the shape of light. It begins with 5 perfect circles and 5 contrasting rocks. The result is orbits. It's about the juxtaposition between technology and nature, allowing the force of gravity to bring the 2 together. The heavier the rock, the more the light is stretched. And although this piece is still, there's a feeling of innate movement created by the push and pull of these 2 opposing forces.
And so even when I'm looking at this work, there's such variety, and it takes me on all sorts of adventures, because as I said at the beginning, an idea, I follow it and see where it takes me. And this work, Convalescence, is a very personal one to me. My dad is from a family of miners, coal miners in Wales, and being a Londoner, that material of coal is something that's very removed from my experience. And so I found one of the last remaining coal mines, and I called them and said, look, can I come and visit? I brought my dad with me, who is small, he's 4'11", but wide, typical Welsh, strong, very passionate person. And we went there, and we went underground, and they welcomed us to see this coal mine that's been active for over 100 years. And it was truly remarkable to actually see where coal comes from, how it's extracted 24 hours a day, with technology that's futuristic on one hand, but in one sense the same. There's even canaries, there's the same outfits, there's the same certain elements that haven't changed for years or decades. And so we took out this coal, and as I was walking out of the mine, I was with my dad, I had a piece of coal, and something happened. It caught the sun, and it completely transformed in my hand. It reflected back, and I thought to myself, what is actually happening with this material? It's a type of coal called anthracite, and this is a piece of work that we created. And I asked myself the question, how much coal would you need to keep one light bulb illuminated for a year? We did the calculation, and this sculpture represents that amount of energy. So it's over 1/2 ton of coal to keep one light bulb, one 200-watt light bulb on for a year. And then you think to yourself, all the billions of light bulbs that we have on every single day, take 6-meter sphere, time, and suddenly you can start to think about how we power our modern world. the implications of that. But we were approaching this quite serious subject in a kind of quite a stunning way, because when people saw the works, they thought they were looking at cut glass or even diamonds. They had no idea that it was coal. And we took it to the Painted Hall in London. And again, the stories that the kind of conversations I was having with people, everyone sort of has an association to coal, whether they've burnt it, whether their family were miners. And it was such an interesting kind of, as I say, entry point to a more serious conversation. I'm very proud of this work. It's called Please Be Seated, a very polite expression. But I wanted the title to be active, to give a hint of what I wanted the public to do. And a developer contacted us and gave us this sketch. And I was like, is there anything else you want to add? And they said, we just want you to think of something to be placed here to kind of activate it. And so I spent time there. And after my design process, we created this work. So curves go up to allow you to walk all the way through, and curves go down so that you can sit. And it was important to not block people's flow, because in this very busy part of London, people are whizzing to work in the mornings, but at lunchtime and after work, there's a kind of a different rhythm where people can sit and relax. And so this work was about encouraging public interaction in a way that felt very natural. We chose recycled timber, so these are recycled scaffolding boards that are usually used on construction sites. We cut them and cleaned them to create the curves. And so there's a warmth to the material. And I think, for me personally, it's quite easy to say you'll create a work that encourages kind of moments where people can sit and interact, whereas this had the ability to do that in a very human way. And I think the material played a part. And then just my last project. This is time loop. So from the top, it looks like a flower. It's one continual line, loops that frame the development this way, the old part of the city. This is in Hong Kong. But again, something that's hopefully interesting to look at, pushes materials, but in the end, it's about creating moments where people can kind of interact with it and come together to create these human moments of connection. Thank you very much.
Thank you.